Hello everyone, thank you for being here. Hope you have a relaxing and comfortable time with Stories for Happy Life channel. The Louisiana District Courtroom buzzed with a familiar energy. Lawyers whispering with their clients, spectators murmuring in hushed tones, and the distant echo of a judge's gavel from another chamber. The heavy scent of old books and polished wood filled the air as Judge Madeline Carter flipped through the case files before her. The morning had already been a blur of sentencing hearings and procedural motions, none of which had truly required her attention beyond a surface-level review. Most days in court followed the same predictable rhythm until the bailiff called the next case. The State of Louisiana versus Noah Reynolds. Madeline barely glanced at the case file as she picked it up. Assault, robbery, resisting arrest. She let out a slow breath. Another defendant lost to the system, another life stuck in a cycle of crime and punishment. Then, the courtroom doors swung open, and Noah Reynolds was escorted in, wrists shackled in front of him. And in an instant, the world tilted. Madeline's breath hitched. Her heart lurched in her chest. The man standing before her wasn't just another case file. It was Noah. Her Noah. The courtroom blurred for a moment. For a split second, she wasn't sitting on the high bench in her black judicial robes. She was 13 years old again. The scent of magnolia trees in the summer heat. The sound of bicycle tires skidding over gravel. A voice laughing beside her as they raced down the dirt path behind the creek. Her throat tightened. This was impossible. It had been over 20 years since she had last seen him. And now he was in front of her, in handcuffs, accused of a violent crime. Their eyes met. Recognition flickered in Noah's face, but he didn't react. He didn't even flinch. Madeline, however, felt the weight of their past come crashing down on her all at once. She tried to swallow the lump in her throat, forcing herself to regain control. You are a judge. He is the defendant. Keep it professional. Her hands tightened around the gavel, but for the first time in her career, she hesitated. Silence stretched. The courtroom waited. Noah's gaze lowered to the floor. The prosecutor cleared his throat. Your Honor? Madeline jolted slightly, blinking herself back into the present. She forced her voice to stay steady. Mr. Reynolds, you stand accused of assault and robbery. How do you plead? Noah finally spoke. His voice was deeper now, roughened by years of hardship, but still unmistakably his. Not guilty, Your Honor. Madeline's pulse pounded in her ears. She wanted to stop everything, to ask him what happened. How had their lives diverged so drastically? But her duty came first. Proceed, she said, keeping her expression neutral. But as the prosecutor began his statement, Madeline's mind wasn't in the courtroom anymore. She was already back in the past. Back to a time when Noah Reynolds was just a boy she once knew. The courtroom faded into the recesses of Madeline's mind as old memories surfaced, dragging her back to Hammond, Louisiana, a small town where people stuck to their own and change was unwelcome. She and Noah Reynolds had grown up in opposite worlds, separated not by miles, but by the unspoken rules of their town. Her family's white picket fence enclosed a neat suburban home, where expectations were set early. She was to be polite, well-educated, and successful. Her path was planned out. Law school, a respectable career, and a carefully chosen social circle. Noah's world was different. He lived on the outskirts of town, where the houses were older, the yards untamed, and life was a daily struggle. His mother worked double shifts at the local diner, barely making enough to support him and his younger sister. Noah never complained, never made excuses. He just figured things out. Their friendship had been an accident. One summer afternoon, Madeline had wandered too far past her backyard, ending up by the creek behind town. She had been 10 years old, scared and lost when she stumbled upon Noah, sitting on the rocks, fishing with an old pole. You lost? He had asked, raising an eyebrow. Madeline had been too embarrassed to answer, so she just nodded silently. Noah had smirked, reeled in his empty line, and walked her home. After that, their friendship was inevitable. They met every summer afternoon by the creek, talking about school, life, and the things they dreamed of. "No one ever leaves this town," Noah had said once, lying in the grass next to her, staring at the sky. "We could," Madeline had replied, only half serious. Noah had turned to her, his expression unreadable. "You ever think about getting out of here?" he asked. "Really getting out?" Madeline had laughed, brushing off the idea. But Noah hadn't been joking. Even as a kid, he saw the world for what it was, a place that didn't always make room for people like him. Their friendship hadn't gone unnoticed. The whispers started first. Neighbors gave Madeline's parents knowing looks whenever they saw her biking with Noah. Teachers subtly steered her away from him, telling her she had such a bright future and should focus on kids with similar goals. Then came the direct warnings. Her father had been waiting on the porch one evening when she came home from Noah's house. Inside, now, his voice was calm but cold. Madeline had hesitated, glancing back at Noah. "I'll see you around," Noah had said, his tone resigned, but they both knew it was a lie. That was the last day they had spent together. A week later, Noah's family moved away, and Madeline had buried their friendship, or so she thought. Now sitting in the courtroom, staring at the man standing in front of her in shackles, she realized that Noah had never truly left her mind. His record showed a long list of minor offenses: petty theft, loitering, disorderly conduct. Nothing that screamed violence, but enough to keep him in and out of the system. What had happened to him after she walked away? Had he ever gotten out of Hammond like he had wanted? Had he ever had a real chance? Or had he just become another statistic, caught in a system that had been rigged against him from the start? The courtroom came back into focus, but Madeline wasn't the same person who had started this case. Noah stood there, his wrists shackled, his expression unreadable. She wanted to say something, to acknowledge their past, but she couldn't. Not here. Not now. The prosecutor, Jonathan Pierce, a tall man with a sharp suit and a sharper tone, rose from his seat. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he began, his voice carrying authority. "This is a case about violence. A man who walked into a convenience store, assaulted a store clerk, and emptied the cash register. The evidence is undeniable." Noah stared at the table, avoiding her gaze. Madeline's stomach tightened. She had handled dozens of cases like this, but this wasn't just any defendant. Noah's lawyer, Samantha Reed, was young, nervous, but determined. She stood and adjusted her blazer, clearing her throat. "The prosecution wants you to believe that this is simple," Samantha said, her voice steady. "But it's not. My client, Noah Reynolds, has maintained his innocence from the start. The evidence doesn't prove what the state claims. We will show that the case is built on assumption, not fact." The first witness, the store clerk, took the stand. He described a man in a red hoodie arguing with the cashier before lunging over the counter and grabbing money from the register. Samantha stood for cross-examination. "Mr. Chambers, you stated that the man who attacked the clerk was wearing a red hoodie. Is that correct?" "Yes." "Did you see his face clearly?" The clerk hesitated. "Not really. It was dark and he had the hood up." Samantha tilted her head slightly. "So, just to clarify, you couldn't definitively identify the suspect?" A pause. "No, but I'm pretty sure it was him." "Pretty sure." Samantha's voice was calm but sharp. "No further questions, Your Honor?" A murmur rippled through the jury. Madeline stole a glance at Noah. He had straightened slightly, as if just that small moment had given him a sliver of hope. Next, the prosecution played the surveillance video. It was grainy and poorly lit, showing a figure in a red hoodie entering the store. The state claimed the man was Noah, but the image wasn't clear. The defense's argument rested on Noah's alibi. He claimed he had been walking home from a friend's house, but the friend refused to testify. too afraid of being targeted by law enforcement. Without a witness, his alibi meant nothing. The jury's expressions hinted at doubt. The case wasn't airtight, but would that be enough? Madeline felt a weight pressing on her chest. This was Noah's life on the line, and she was the one holding the gavel. She had to be impartial. But how could she, when the past was sitting in front of her, looking at a future that might be taken away? The trial resumed after a tense break, the weight of the case pressing down on everyone in the courtroom. Madeline sat at the bench, her fingers curled tightly around the gavel, her face impassive but her mind racing. Could she trust the system to get this right? Samantha Reed stood, her posture more confident than before. Your Honor, the defense calls Officer Daniel Harris to the stand. A murmur spread through the room as a burly officer with a gruff expression made his way to the witness chair. Madeline sat up a little straighter. This was where the cracks, if there were any, would start to show. Samantha walked to the stand, her voice calm. Officer Harris, you were the arresting officer in this case, correct? That's right, Harris said, his tone clipped. You stated in your report that Mr. Reynolds was walking 2 blocks from the crime scene when you detained him? Yes. And what led you to believe he was the suspect? Harris shifted slightly in his seat. He matched the description, a black male, mid-40s, wearing dark clothing. Samantha paused, tilting her head slightly. Dark clothing? She repeated. The suspect in the surveillance video was wearing a red hoodie, was he not? A flicker of hesitation. Yeah, but he could have taken it off. Samantha took a step closer. Did you or any other officer search the area to locate this supposed hoodie? Harris's jaw tightened. No, we didn't have time. We apprehended him quickly. The courtroom stilled. The jury exchanged uncertain glances. Madeline could feel the shift. The prosecution's case wasn't as strong as it seemed. Samantha wasn't done. Officer Harris, when you detained Mr. Reynolds, did he say anything? He protested, said he was innocent. Samantha's voice hardened slightly. Did you investigate that claim, or did you assume guilt based solely on his appearance? A tense silence filled the room. Harris's face reddened. I followed protocol. Samantha nodded slowly. Protocol, she echoed, her voice laced with skepticism. No further questions, Your Honor. The buzz in the courtroom grew louder as Harris stepped down. Madeline's heart pounded. This was no longer just a trial. It was a reckoning. The defense's next move shocked everyone. Samantha called a forensic analyst to the stand, someone who had reviewed the surveillance footage. The analyst adjusted their glasses, flipping through notes. Based on the height and build of the individual in the footage, they said carefully, there is no definitive way to confirm the suspect was Noah Reynolds. A hushed reaction swept through the room. Madeline's grip on the gavel tightened. But that wasn't all. The forensic analyst cleared their throat. Additionally, we discovered that the timestamp on the footage had been altered. The prosecutor, Jonathan Pierce, immediately stood up. Objection, he snapped. This is pure speculation. But Madeline knew better. This wasn't speculation. This was reasonable doubt, and doubt was everything in a case like this. The jury's expressions shifted. The tide was turning. Samantha turned to Noah. Your Honor, my client would like to testify. Madeline inhaled sharply. She had seen many defendants take the stand, but this wasn't just any defendant. This was Noah. And this moment could change everything. The courtroom settled into a tense silence as Noah Reynolds stood from his seat, his chains clinking softly as he made his way to the witness stand. Madeline could feel the weight of the moment. This was his chance to be heard. The jury watched him carefully, their expressions a mixture of skepticism and curiosity. Samantha Reed approached the stand, her voice steady. Mr. Reynolds, you've heard the allegations against you. Tell the court, did you commit this crime? Noah swallowed hard, gripping the edges of the witness stand. No, ma'am, he said, his voice quiet but firm. I didn't. Samantha nodded encouragingly. Tell us where you were the night of the incident. Noah took a deep breath. I was walking home from my friend's house. I stopped at the corner store for some snacks, then started heading back. He looked toward the jury, his dark eyes full of unspoken pain. Then I saw the police lights. Next thing I knew, I was on the ground, in cuffs. The jury listened intently. Some leaned forward, others fidgeted uncomfortably. Samantha continued. Did the officers ask you any questions before arresting you? Noah's jaw clenched. No, they just said I fit the description and threw me in the car. A murmur spread through the courtroom. Samantha let the words sink in before stepping closer. How did that make you feel? Noah hesitated. Like I was already guilty, he said quietly. His voice cracked slightly as he continued. I've spent my whole life trying to be seen as more than just this. He gestured to the orange jumpsuit he was wearing. But no matter what I do, people like me are guilty first. Innocence comes second, if it comes at all. A heavy silence followed. Even Madeline, who had trained herself to stay impartial, felt something shift inside her. Samantha stepped back, her job done. No further questions, Your Honor. A system exposed. Jonathan Pierce, the prosecutor, stood up, smoothing his tie. His confidence had wavered slightly, but he was still prepared to fight. Mr. Reynolds, he began, his voice sharp. You claim you were walking home, yet you were found just blocks from the crime scene. Isn't that suspicious? Noah held his gaze. Not if I live near there. A few chuckles rippled through the gallery. Jonathan's expression hardened. Your alibi witness refused to testify. Doesn't that suggest you might be lying? Noah's eyes darkened. Or it means he's scared. Jonathan paused, clearly frustrated. Let's talk about the money found on you. Almost the exact amount stolen. Coincidence? Noah exhaled slowly. I got paid that morning. I had my paycheck cashed before I went to my friend's place. Jonathan flipped through his papers, scrambling. And yet you ran from the police. I didn't run, Noah interrupted, his voice calm but firm. I walked. Another murmur from the crowd. Jonathan tried to recover. Mr. Reynolds, be honest. Do you have a criminal record? Noah set his jaw. Misdemeanors, petty theft when I was younger. Jonathan pounced. So you admit you've stolen before? Noah tilted his head slightly, his expression unchanging. I was 17. I stole food. I was hungry. A few jurors exchanged glances. Jonathan sighed, clearly losing ground. He knew it. Madeline knew it. He waved a dismissive hand. No further questions, Your Honor. The verdict. The jury deliberated for hours. The courtroom emptied and refilled, spectators stretching their legs, whispering among themselves. Noah sat quietly at the defense table, his hands clasped tightly in front of him. He hadn't looked at Madeline once since the trial started. She couldn't blame him. What could she possibly say to make any of this better? Finally, the bailiff stepped forward. All rise. The jury had reached a verdict. Madeline's pulse quickened, but her face remained composed. The foreperson stood, a piece of paper trembling in her hands. In the case of the state of Louisiana versus Noah Reynolds, we find the defendant. A pause. It was unbearable. Not guilty. A gasp rippled through the room. Some cheered. Others muttered in disbelief. Madeline tapped her gavel lightly. Order in the court. She turned to Noah, her voice steady. Mr. Reynolds, you are free to go. Noah's shoulders sagged as if a weight had been lifted, but his expression remained unreadable. He had won his freedom, but at what cost? Unfinished business. The courtroom emptied. Noah signed his release paperwork, and for a moment, Madeline thought he might leave without a word. But then, he turned and approached her. The room was nearly empty, just a few clerks gathering files. Noah stopped a few feet from the bench, his expression guarded. You knew me, he said quietly, and you didn't say anything. Madeline felt her throat tighten. Because I couldn't. The words caught in her throat. I had to be fair. If I had said something, It might have jeopardized the case. Noah studied her, his face a mix of hurt and understanding. Fair, he repeated, his voice hollow. Then, more softly, the world's never been fair, not for people like me. Madeline nodded slowly, her gaze dropping to the polished wood of the bench. You're right. Her voice was barely above a whisper. I wish I had done more back then. I wish I could have done more now. Noah sighed, the tension in his posture easing slightly. We were kids. We didn't know any better. He paused. But you know now, don't you? Madeline met his gaze. I do. A long silence. And I'm sorry. Noah gave a faint nod. Then he turned and walked away, his back straight as he disappeared through the courthouse doors. A new purpose. Madeline sat alone in the empty courtroom. The weight of Noah's words pressed on her. She had upheld the law, but the trial had revealed a deeper truth. Justice wasn't just about verdicts and evidence. It was about the lives shaped by a system far larger than any one person. For Madeline, this was a wake-up call. A reminder that her position wasn't just a seat of power. It was a platform for change. As she left the courtroom, the fading sun cast long shadows across the courthouse steps. Madeline made a silent vow. She couldn't change the past, but she would do everything in her power to ensure the future held more than hollow promises of fairness. It would be hard, perhaps even impossible, but she owed it. To Noah, to herself, to justice. What is lesson here? 1. Justice should be more than a verdict. Laws are meant to protect, but when they are applied unfairly, they can destroy lives. True justice requires looking beyond the surface and ensuring fairness for all. 2. The past shapes us, but it doesn't define us. Noah and Madeline took different paths, but their reunion forced them to face their past and the choices that led them here. We all have the power to grow, learn, and change. Number 3. Bias in the system hurts everyone. The case revealed how easily someone can be labeled guilty based on assumptions rather than evidence. Recognizing and challenging bias is the first step toward real justice. 4. Courage comes in many forms. Noah had the courage to fight for his innocence, and Madeline had to find the strength to question the very system she believed in. Doing the right thing isn't always easy, but it's always necessary. 5. We can't change the past, but we can shape the future. Madeline couldn't undo what happened to Noah, but she could use her position to make sure others weren't treated unfairly. Change starts with acknowledging the truth and taking action. This story reminds us that justice isn't just about laws. It's about who enforces them, who they protect, and who they leave behind. What would you have done in Madeline's position? Let's talk in the comments.